Danny Flexen here for Seconds Out for the latest edition of DiBella'S Digest with the man himself, Lou DiBella. And unlike last week, I'm going to get the opening salvo in first and ask how your week's been.
Yeah, I watched one of the great wars I've seen in recent memory with Baranchek and Zepeda, but honestly, it scared the dickens out of me. Particularly when it was 1 year ago today that Pat Day, was gravely injured and succumbed thereafter to his injury. So when I saw Ivan knocked out cold, I had a really an unpleasant flashback. I didn't have the best weekend, but I was really grateful that he got a clean bill of health and was let out of the hospital on Sunday. So that, it was a strange start to my week. And then I figured I needed a little bit of a break. So I went to Vermont for 5 days,
Lovely.
Sat by lakes and watched leaves change and didn't see that many people. So it was, I had a nice enough week. Thanks for asking, Benny.
No problem. Do you get an idea that people around boxing are remembering the tragic passing of Patrick Day and what happened there? Because I haven't seen much on social media about it being the anniversary.
I've seen some stuff here. I mean, there's been some stuff remembering it. Excuse me. I think today is what day? Today is the
10th.
10th. The 10th. So we're basically we're almost at the anniversary. I think it's the 12th. You'll see some stuff coming out on our social media or whatever, but I don't think people have forgotten, and certainly not in the New York area where Patrick was literally maybe the best liked of all fighters who were local, universally loved by everybody. But you know what, man, it doesn't really matter so much to me if people remember or not. What matters more to me is that we're not doing anything much differently in terms of health and safety. And, we have a lot of gross mismatches. I don't think that the paramedical response to these injuries in the ring has been adequate. We don't do enough to guard against brain injury and to really look at what we can do to make things safer. The system of judging is horrendous and there's complete unfairness in boxing, but the failure to adequately protect health and safety is literally life or death kind of thing. So it's even more profound than the need to clean up our judging. But I'm disappointed lately in the judging. I'm disappointed in our inability to make wholesale changes to health and safety. And I think that the reason it's so difficult to get anything done in either one of those areas is that the problems are so systemic. It's really a matter of changing the whole governance and system of boxing. And that's not going to happen overnight. And one person can't make that happen. Not even a group of people can make that happen. There has to be almost like a uniform effort. And, like everything else in boxing, there's never a uniform effort.
Before you talk about some of the things in terms of safety modifications you'd like to see, just tell us briefly, if you can, how you'll remember Patrick Day and what sort of guy he was for people that don't know.
He's one of the most optimistic, positive, loving, friendly, kind kids I've ever met in boxing. I also very bright, emphasis in his family on education, personal emphasis on education. But I'll remember more than anything his kindness, and I'll also remember how much he wanted to be a fighter, and how much he thought that being a fighter allowed him to reach out and touch a lot of people and make. He really. I mean, I know this is hard because his family didn't want him to fight, and his mom really didn't want him to fight, and I know that his family's gone through a terrible time over the last year. And I also know that they've got a lot of resentment toward the boxing as a sport and as an industry. I think his mom had this underlying fear forever that, her son, who had the ability to be a doctor or a lawyer or do anything else he wanted, was engaging in a sport that was so dangerous. And he wasn't going to be denied, though, because it's what he wanted to do. He was a wonderful kid. I can't I can't say enough about his quality as a person. He was as good a person as I've ever promoted.
And as you said, since the tragedy happened a year ago now, not enough has changed in terms of the safety protocols within boxing. Primarily, as you said, because there's no uniformity among the associations and so on. What changes predominantly would you like to see?
I mean, you need a look. I'll give you another example of something too, and this occurred to me in the course of the last week also. If a fighter gets knocked unconscious and he goes to hospital and they find that he had a brain injury, that fighter, there are HIPAA laws which means laws that protect the secrecy of medical records and people's ability to keep medical records confidential. You could have a brain injury, a significant brain injury that probably dictates you shouldn't fight again. And you never have to report that to anybody. And there's no exception or law that says a fighter to continue to engage if there should be some kind of laws. If a fighter sent to hospital for fear of brain injury, that the hospital report has to be presented in order for that fighter to get licensed to fight in the future. But there's nothing that says that. So if you have a CAT scan and it's really messed up in a hospital, and then 6 months later you have a clean CAT scan, someone's going to let you fight again. Yeah. We don't even have requirements for nuclear imaging, MRIs, or CAT scans in most of the country. Some states require them regularly, others don't. You can get knocked out in certain jurisdictions, or you can send your fighter to Mexico, to Juarez, or to Tijuana, or wherever to fight, and he can fight someone that's been knocked out 14 times in a row. You shouldn't be allowed to be knocked out 14 times in a row. How many concussions do you need? That person is brain injured by definition. We so lack health and safety guidelines as almost to be barbaric at this point. There needs to be an MRI of every fighter when he's given his first pro license, because without that, you don't have anything to compare subsequent MRIs or CAT scans to. So there should be like a baseline nuclear image that's done just when you turn pro. But there should be an international, not only national, an international database for health and safety issues, so that guys aren't traveling to get another payday when they don't belong in the ring. But there's so many problems. And also, like, the problems are obvious in everything that goes on. There are way fewer small shows happening right now than there were before the pandemic, but there are still some happening. And the majority of the small shows now that are happening are COVID fests, in the sense that there is no testing, and they're simply happening in jurisdictions that politically aren't protecting people the same way as jurisdictions that are more careful. I'm not going to promote a show in that kind of environment. As a result, I'm arguing with some people who are saying, well, there are other shows going on. And I'm like, well, there are no shows going on in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, any place else I promote. And I can't afford to do a show without a big television budget in a bubble. And I'm not going to promote unsafely. But there are shows going on where there literally is no rules, no testing, and you would think that we're not in a pandemic. Basically, we simply don't have a great history of protecting our fighters and our athletes, and we still don't have a great history of it, and we certainly don't have any history of change. And I don't want to constantly sound negative, but it is what it is, man, and you got to at least tell the truth. And if you're not real about things, you're never going to get better.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think some of the things you mentioned, the British Boxing Board of Control here, do some of those things. For example, if someone's had a run of stoppage or knockout defeats, they will take away their license. They've done it quite often, particularly with journeyman.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, I saw a guy recently that had 220 losses or something. And you know what I'm talking about? Like, he was getting a lot of attention on social media because of his record. I mean, he had like some kind of, but the guy was still fighting 4-rounders, and he had a record like I've never. I'm sorry, like, that can't be safe.
You guys don't have journeyman in the US, do you? In the same way we do, it's kind of a thing over here.
No, we had journeyman. Like, there was a famous journeyman named Strickland here, Reggie Strickland. Yeah. who was also like a not a bad fighter. I mean, he you know, the old proverbial, he'll give you rounds.
Yeah.
He's a rugged, tough guy. But you know what, man? Losing 50 times in a row, you probably shouldn't be in a ring. Or losing 47 out of 50 times, you shouldn't be in a ring. And you know what? Getting concussed multiple times in a row, you shouldn't be allowed to get concussed 7 times in a row. Shouldn't be allowed. You know, and it's just common human decency that you would think that would dictate that. But anyway, I don't want to continue that conversation. It's too fucking depressing.
I understand. Well, something a bit more positive that you're involved in was confirmed since we last spoke, something that you've been working on for months, because we've talked about it a few times before, and it's the biggest boxing match in New Zealand history between Joseph Parker and your fighter, Junior Farr. Just tell us, first of all, what was kind of the final hurdle that you guys needed to get over to make it official?
You know, there was no particular hurdle. It was more like, you know, David Higgins and I talked multiple times. It was always friendly and cordial. But I always made it clear to him that I knew the situation here, and both fighters needed this fight right now. And it was the only major fight you could make on New Zealand where both of the contestants are local, because New Zealand right now is closed off to the world for all intents and purposes. So I wasn't going to do a bad deal. And I was basically saying to David, we're both going to be a little bit unhappy when this negotiation ends because it's going to be a fair deal. And I simply wasn't going to sign on. And it became like a waiting game and a chess game. But ultimately, I think the deal that we ultimately made was very fair to Parker and his team, but also very fair to Junior. It is life-changing money for Junior. And a fight that if he wins, he immediately becomes an icon in New Zealand sports and a star. It's not an easy task. He's never fought anybody like Joe Parker. It's a big leap up in quality for Junior. But you know what? Junior was in the ring 4 times with Parker as an amateur and beat him twice. And if you listen to most people, beat him 3 out of 4. So, you know, it's a fight he can win. He's young, he's big, he's at full strength again, he's healthy. As I have tremendous respect for Joe Parker. First of all, I love him as a person. He's an entertainer. He's got a great personality. He can sing, he can dance, he can do everything, and he's a hell of a fighter. But I think Junior's going to go into that fight confident, with nothing to lose, knowing that he can change his whole family's history with one win. So I think it's going to be a fantastic night for boxing in New Zealand, and a big, huge event over there, but also a quality heavyweight fight for boxing fans all over the world to enjoy, because it's going to be on DAZN.
I mean, obviously it means more in New Zealand than it does anywhere else, but given how few big fights we've had in 2020 and the fact that there will be fans in attendance for this as well, it's got to be one of the biggest fights of the year globally.
I think it will be. Also, in terms of like the atmosphere and the fans, I don't think there's any place the rest of the year where you're going to see the number of fans you're going to see there. I mean, they literally have no cases of COVID in New Zealand. None. So there's no restriction on the crowd. So you're going to see a big, lively, engaged crowd, which will be very refreshing to see for a quality fight. And I also have another one of my young heavyweights on the card, Hemi Ahio, is going to fight on the undercard, and he can punch like a mule, and I think he's going to be a major factor in the division also. So I'm excited about that card, and I'm excited I was able to get it done. And I think it'll be a good thing for boxing fans, something else to watch in December.
Now, just before we let you go, we wanted to talk to you. I spoke to you briefly off camera about it, the dispute that's arisen in the last week or so between Bob Arum and Eddie Hearn, predominantly regarding the failure.
I hope they knock the shit out of each other. So go ahead.
I'm sure they will if they ever meet up. Kind of travel restrictions will block that potential barn burner for now. But yeah, basically it started with Bob Arum.
Hey, Arum's small, and he might be 88 years old, but he's a tough little fucker. But go ahead.
He smokes more weed than Mike Tyson. That's the worry.
And more than me. But that doesn't make him a bad guy. So
it arose initially because Bob Arum seemed to be upset that neither Eddie Hearn nor anyone else in the UK from the major broadcasters had decided to pick up the UK TV rights for Lomachenko against Lopez, which is now going to be on a pay-per-view streaming service here in the UK. And initially, he
You know
was on
what?
the
I think that that's unfortunate on one level because in my favorite fight for the remainder of 2020, it's just the fight that I want to see as a fan the most is Lomachenko and Teofimo, and it's unfortunate that it's not going to be on a more widely distributed service in the UK. That being said, I wonder is this really Eddie who should be criticized? And I'm going to throw this out to you, Danny, to ask you a question, or is it more the tastes of UK boxing fans? Because it's always seemed to me that you guys are more into, like, we bring fighters over from all over the world to the United States that are quality fighters, but no one gives a flying fuck about them. No one gives a flying fuck about watching them. Nobody. And we'll sit there and then you'll have the hipster, small hipster contingent of know-it-all little boxing geeks talking about how great some obscure guy is whose name you can't pronounce. But then nobody watches it because nobody cares. But you guys will do, I don't want to call them like, bad fighters, but you'll take two pedestrian fighters who are local and put them in some kind of Commonwealth or local title fight. And there's huge interest.
yeah.
Now, is Eddie and these other people not buying Teofimo or versus Lomachenko for any reason other than they don't think it's as attractive as some of the local yokel stuff they can buy for cheap?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. And from what I've heard, Aaron was asking for quite a high fee for the rights. But also during these times, I think budgets are restricted. And I think a year ago, Eddie probably would have bought Lomachenko Lopez, or maybe BT Sport would have, or one of the other major broadcasters.
Look, there are a lot of, to each his own. You know what I mean? To each his own. I can't criticize that decision by her not to buy it or these other people not to buy it if they truly believed there wasn't going to be the interest and that it wasn't money well spent. But I think that is somewhat reflective of the likes and dislikes and habits of UK boxing fans. You guys are tremendous fans, and there's nothing wrong with this because I wish that boxing in the United States was a little bit more parochial. I wish that we supported our American fighters to a greater extent than we do, and didn't offer a platform to fighters from Uzbekistan and every place else on earth. Nothing wrong with Uzbekistan. It's great fighters from Uzbekistan. But as great as they are, I don't think Americans want to see a constant diet of Uzbek fighters or Russian fighters or any foreign fighters. I wish there was a little bit more parochiality here in the sense that we supported our own a little bit more. That doesn't mean that, look, my best heavyweight prospect is from Uzbekistan, and Jalalov, who I think will be a world champion someday. And I think that the Uzbek boxing program is one of the greatest in the world. The Russian boxing program is very strong, but Russia is not spending its boxing budget on Americans. The UK is not spending a big chunk of its boxing budget on Americans, and we behave in a very different way. Maybe that has a little bit to do with the dwindling attractiveness of our sport to the American sports fan. We're not particularly kicking ass with our American fan base. And maybe that's part of it. So I'm not going to be so critical of the decision not to purchase it. However, it does strike me as a big enough fight that you would have thought one of the bigger players in British boxing would have picked it up.
Yeah, I think a year ago, like I say, a year or two ago, it definitely would have been picked up. But I think when decisions have to be made in terms of budgets, it doesn't make the cut simply because it's on at 4 or 5 a.m. here, and how many people are going to watch it at that time or record
and that's
it?
And that's a completely fair reason not to spend your money there. And if they can spend less money, someone doing a Sonny Edwards fight or a cheese versus egg fight or something like that. Look, no one in America wants to see cheese versus egg. No one gives a fuck. But in the UK, those guys are competitive and they put on a good match, and a lot of people are interested. They're two guys with local popularity. If they can buy that kind of fight cheaper, and that's what people would rather see, then and it's not. And by the way, it's prime time, not 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I'm not going to be so critical, though I sort of do love any time that Eddie has to take some shit. But on this one, I'm not willing to be overly critical.
Well, that's very magnanimous of you, Lou. I'm sure Eddie will appreciate it. really appreciate your time as always. I hope the next week brings even better things for you. Although you've just nailed the biggest fight in New Zealand history, so how much better can it get?
I'm gonna, I'm hustling, man. I want to, I'm still not at a point where I can do a show at all in the tri-state area or anything here locally, but I'm working very hard to place some fights. I have some announcements that have recently been made. I'm going to have my kid, who I think a future world champion, Charles Conwell, had a terrific performance on ESPN on Wednesday night, beat an undefeated Wendy Toussaint, knocked him out in the 9th round, won almost every round. Charles is probably going to come back in December on a new boxing series called Ring City. That's NBC Sports, and that's televising in New York. I have Oshaki Foster fighting Mickey Roman on what's a very good 130-pound fight in November on that series. So I have that stuff coming. And then maybe by the time we talk next week, we'll be able to talk more about a pretty big announcement that I think is coming soon about women's boxing.
Wow. Okay. Well, I look forward to that one.
Great. And other than that, good talking to you, Danny. And
it's a pleasure.
Rock on.